Welcome back to another episode of Pixel Peek. I see that you've survived your second go-around in the editorial section.
What? It was just reading. No big deal.
Are you sure you're not speaking up because you're so excited to get started with this week's episode?
Oh yeah! Microsoft is offering HoloLens 2 to the US Army and engineers are upset, so we gotta dive deeper into that.
And both EA and Activision's bosses are raking in the dough based on a report by As We Sow, maybe a little too much.
We'll also touch on how esports arenas are coming to a few Walmarts across the US.
Whoa, weird. Anyway, stay tuned to see our Nintendo analysts talk about Pokémon Sword and Shield, where we'll find out more about the starters and region where the games take place.
We'll also look into what writer Mack Stein thinks about the reception of BioWare's Anthem and how it's linked to Bethesda's Fallout 76 infamous failure.
And to get your daily jump scare in, catch Logan Berg giving his review on the elusive Taiwanese horror game Devotion.
Well, let's go ahead and get started. I'm Jean-Luc Clark.
And I'm Kristen Lawrence, and we hope you enjoy your stay here on Pixel Peek.
In November, Microsoft won a $480 million bid to provide AR technology to the US Army for its Integrated Visual Augmentation System program. The Washington-based company is expected to provide the armed forces with HoloLens builds that, according to the Army, will increase soldiers' lethality, mobility, and situational awareness. The goal is to provide soldiers with heads-up displays that will help them in combat. On Monday, however, a group of Microsoft employees banded together to pressure their employer into withdrawing from the contract. The group, Microsoft Workers for Good, posted a letter to Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella and Chief Legal Officer Brad Smith, demanding the contract be dropped and stricter ethical policies established. In the letter, the group said, "We are alarmed that Microsoft is working to provide weapons technology to the US military, helping one's country government increase lethality using tools we built. We did not sign up to develop weapons, and we demand a say in how our work is used." The group argues that the technology will be used to help kill people and said it will be deployed on the battlefield and works by turning warfare into a simulated video game, further distancing soldiers from the grim stakes of war and the reality of bloodshed. In an interview with CNN, Nadella addressed the letter saying, "We made a principled decision that we're not going to withhold technology from institutions that we have elected in democracies to protect the freedoms we enjoy."
On Monday, As You Sow, a nonprofit that promotes corporate accountability, released a report that shows Activision and EA CEOs Bobby Kotick and Andrew Wilson are among some of the most overpaid executives in the United States. The organization analyzes companies every year to determine how much executives are overpaid, and by their metrics, Kotick is the most overpaid person in the games industry in the US, with a salary of just under $29 million, roughly 306 times more than the average Activision employee. The disparity between the average EA employee and the CEO, Andrew Wilson, is somehow even greater, as Wilson makes around $36 million annually, or 371 times the salary of the average worker at the company. To put these numbers in perspective, CEOs typically make around 142 times that of their employees at the 500 largest companies in the US. Both Kotick and Wilson blow that ratio out of the water. Meanwhile, both companies have announced significant layoffs this year, with Activision shedding nearly 10% of its workforce earlier this month, and EA firing most of its Australian development studio last week.
When picturing an esports arena, one might imagine stadium lights, lasers, and big screen projectors surrounding a row of computers where athletes face off. Well, the Wednesday Night Fights weekly tournament is challenging that visual by hosting competitions within select Walmart stores. This news doesn't come off as a complete surprise, as Walmart announced a partnership with Esports Arena back in November, but still, the mental image of what an esports venue would look like inside a Walmart store is a little unusual. In addition to the partnership with Walmart, Wednesday Night Fights will also be teaming up with fighting game tournament organizer Level Up, Capcom, and NBC to broadcast a Street Fighter face-off, ending in a 5 vs 5 rivalry exhibition between the best players in California. The Walmarts to receive esports arenas will be in Roseville, California, Spokane Valley, Washington, Colorado Springs, Colorado, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Fort Worth, Texas. Boone's Walmart was unfortunately excluded, but at least we can tune into NBC to see these strange venues in action on March 9th.
On Tuesday night, fighting game convention Evolution Championship Series announced the lineup for 2019's tournaments. And to the surprise of many, Super Smash Bros. Melee didn't make the cut this year. Since Melee launched in 2002, it's been one of the cornerstones of events in the fighting game community, and it remains a fan favorite to this day. Earlier in February, the nearly 20-year-old fighter pulled in more than 100,000 viewers at Genesis 6 while competing for watch time with the Super Bowl. As time has gone on, many people outside of the Melee community voiced their displeasure with an older game seeing main stage attention when newer attractions could benefit more from it. And Melee fans often found themselves at odds with players of other games, including those within the Smash Bros. Franchise. Melee will still be at other tournaments later this year, but for now, EVO decided that it was time to move on, and 2018 Smash Ultimate will be taking Melee's place.
On Tuesday, Darksiders 3 publisher THQ Nordic found itself in hot water after hosting an AMA on 8chan, a board with ties to Gamergate and white supremacist movements that is also notorious for spreading child pornography. The publisher's Twitter account announced on Tuesday morning that it would be hosting the event, saying, "We're doing an 8chan AMA, and we have no idea why." And within a handful of hours, the company was neck deep in damage control after seeing gargantuan backlash from fans. The THQ Nordic account owner seemingly knew that something would go awry, saying that someone had assured the company that they would take care of the nasty stuff. Following this, PR and marketing director for THQ Nordic, Philip Brock, said in a statement, "I personally agreed to this AMA without doing my proper due diligence to understand the history and the controversy of the site. I do not condone child pornography, white supremacy, or racism in any shape or form." The nasty stuff that the company mentioned was seemingly not taken care of, as the AMA was peppered with pornographic images, racial slurs, and questions regarding Lolly. This, of course, wasn't unexpected, as 8chan is where 4chan users go when they feel their freedom of speech is being stifled.
As the public opinion of Overwatch's current meta intensifies, some players have started lashing out at the voice actors. Brigitte's voice actor, Matilda Smidius, received more hate than others, mostly because players against the trend believe that Brigitte's debut in Overwatch is to blame for its current competitive state. It started with aggressive tweets early last week, with Smidius responding with, like, "Fine, if you feel like one character destroyed a whole game, you have the right to think so, but maybe give constructive criticism to the developers instead of harassing the voice actor." It wasn't long after Smidius's tweet was posted that other fans reached out to her offering support. And the positive feedback led Smidius to post a 7-minute thank you video on her personal YouTube channel. In the video, she expresses why she publicly responded to the message and how grateful she is of the rest of the Overwatch team and the fans that empathized with her on Twitter. The negativity surrounding the 3-tank, 3-support meta may be seeing its end with the release of the Haitian combat medic Baptiste. But he can't solve the problem of there being no black women in Overwatch, something we discussed in Season 2, Episode 3's editorial. And that's it for news this week. Let's move on to this week's analysis segment. The Pokémon Direct dropped this past Wednesday and revealed the Generation 8 titles, Pokémon Sword and Pokémon Shield. We're here with Nintendo analyst Zack Beasley to break it down. Thanks for joining us, Zack.
Glad to be here.
Alrighty. So based off the trailer, what can we expect from Galar?
Galar seems to be based off of jolly old England. It seems like it's going to incorporate a lot of different pieces of England's history. The most noticeable to me was probably industrialization. It seems like there's a really big town with a lot of heavy machinery, it's brickwork, things like that. It seems really cool. There seems to be also mines, like you can explore mountains, and also it mentioned in the trailer a little bit about idyllic highlands, like it looks like grassy plains, stuff like that.
So Zach, building off of the more recent series entries, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, what aspects do you think they're bringing over for this one?
Unfortunately, other than Pikachu, it looks like none.
Okay.
I'm sure they'll incorporate the clothing options. That's kind of been a staple in the past few title entries, I think, since X and Y. But other than that, there's a lot of features that I think people liked, I personally liked, in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee that are not going to be there. Specifically, being able to see wild Pokemon in the overworld. It looks like it's going to go back to random encounters when you're in dungeons, caves, or in tall grass, which is a little bit of a bummer because you don't get a say anymore in who you want to catch, who you want to battle, and it was a nice little change of pace. And it also looks like they're scrapping another really beloved idea in that your Pokemon doesn't seem to follow you anymore, and I'm sure people are going to be very upset about that.
Gotcha.
So what changes would you like to see to the Pokemon formula?
I'd like to see just small tweaks, nothing super major. Not having the really cool abilities of Pokemon, like Greninja has an ability called Protean, where his type changes depending on which move he uses. That's super cool, but it's locked as like a hidden ability. It's not an ability you get when you just start with your Pokemon. So maybe allowing the cooler abilities to be more accessible, maybe have your Pokemon interact with the overworld would just be something nicer to see, because it seems like Pokemon over the past few years has remained relatively static, or they'll introduce a cool idea and throw it away. Like Mega Evolutions, they're incredibly interesting, they add a lot of variety and even more depth to certain Pokemon. Z-moves were cool to a point, but after you've seen that animation the 1 or 2 times, you're like, all right, I'm over this. I think they could really benefit from changing up the formula similar to Call of Duty Blackout. They didn't really change the formula that much, it's still a first-person shooter. They just added the Battle Royale aspect to it, and it completely revitalized the support for Call of Duty. It's pretty formulaic, and people are like, oh, it's the same thing over and over again. But Blackout kind of changed the public perception. And same with another Nintendo IP is Breath of the Wild. While the gameplay is still the same, you're solving puzzles, you're exploring, they gave you all the tools at the start, and that made a huge difference. It completely changed the way you play a game, and it made it that much more exciting.
So Zach, speaking of evolutions, Nintendo has recently been doing a lot of like reinventing their IPs. Do you think Pokemon is going to do the same thing?
Other than the Pokemon evolving themselves, nice pun there, it's probably not going to do much. Game Freak knows how to sell. They know they're always going to sell, so they either don't want to risk, alienating the really casual base, because not everybody wants a super deep RPG out of Pokemon. They don't want to think about min-maxing their stats, thinking about things like EVs and IVs, or like hidden abilities like I was just talking about. They kind of want this super basic, adorable monsters just going at each other. You pick your favorites and you just kind of progress through a really interesting world or an interesting story.
Right.
Can you talk about the starters and what makes them distinctive?
Okay, so Grookey, other than the fact that he's a monkey and he has a stick, it looks like he kind of plays music. I don't know. The trailer just says he beats on a rock. And he does typical monkey things. He's going to be the grass starter, and he looks really cool to me. There's Score Bunny, the fire type. It's a rabbit, and he looks like he's going to be really fast and, do typical bunny things, hopping around, maybe be like a physical fighter with his feet or something like that. A lot of people are actually really worried he's going to be another fire and fighting type, because if you look at him, he seems to have almost like a Band-Aid patch on his nose, so people are a little bit worried about that. And the third starter, Sobble, I think it's the community's favorite. To me, he is anxiety incarnate. He looks like he can disappear, like he can use water to camouflage himself, and he generally just looks like a really sad boy, and people really want to protect him. And so I think that's why people like him a lot.
So which one are you going to be choosing?
Grookey, I don't know why. There's something about him. I think he's really cute, and I think there's a lot of cool things you could do. Maybe make him like Son Goku from Journey to the West, make him like a cool ninja, have that stick grow and turn into like a staff or something like that. Would be really cool to me.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, that's all the time we got, but thanks so much for stopping by, Zach. And now, let's pass it over to Bobby Agins for this week's editorial.
Earlier this month, BioWare's latest game, Anthem, released on Xbox One, PS4, and PC to room temperature reception. The goal of Anthem was to bring a BioWare style of play to a multiplayer world and see how players could work together to bring it to life. Unfortunately, its launch didn't go exactly as planned, and the game's PC version now sits at a score of 60 on Metacritic. Now, while Metacritic scores don't tell us much on their own, looking through the reviews that were aggregated points to Anthem having a compelling world and a neat premise, but falling flat because of a lackluster gameplay loop and a plethora of bugs and network issues. As such, what could have been a strong first foray into multiplayer games for BioWare became another entry in a recent trend of releasing games that were not ready to see the light of day. If you feel like you're having deja vu, don't worry, you're not. The release of Anthem, while not being quite as disastrous, is quite reminiscent of the release of Fallout 76 in November of last year. 76, like Anthem, was also Bethesda's first dive into a large-scale multiplayer game, and it also tries to blend single and multiplayer experiences into one package. Like Anthem, it wasn't ready when it first saw the light of day, and now both developers are stuck playing catch-up, trying to get their games into places that will entice new players to join in on the fun. Both games were forced out before they were ready, however, and they both illustrate the increasingly blurring line between early access and full releases. For most of the game industry's history, early access was not a thing that developers did. Instead, they would work on the game, then bring in playtesters that had signed non-disclosure agreements to get feedback on the game. However, when the indie game development boom started to come into fruition during the Xbox 360 and PS3 era, not everyone could afford to do so. Games are expensive to develop, and many developers were already relying on Kickstarters or personal funds to work on their projects. These smaller developers couldn't afford to partake in the same development practices as large studios, so to see feedback and constructive criticism, games like Minecraft were released during alpha and beta builds. In 2013, Steam launched its Early Access program, which gave developers a dedicated space to distribute and receive feedback on their games. This allowed them to grow communities that played alongside development and highlighted the highs and lows of games before they saw full release, so they could be addressed ahead of time. This practice spawned a number of successful independent games like PUBG, Kerbal Space Program, and Dead Cells. Like everything else though, larger companies have adopted these practices and are hell-bent on ruining them for everyone. If there were ever a concern about making players pay for an unfinished game, those have clearly dissipated and given way to the mentality that large publishers can release unfinished games and then fix them on the go. They're now taking advantage of programs and methodologies that were afforded to developers that couldn't match their resources and more or less just using them to push products out ahead of schedule. Fallout 76 and Anthem both clearly needed months more development time than they received, and their reception wears it on its sleeves. 76 was panned across the board for unpolished gameplay and merchandising mishaps, while Anthem is seeing responses like this one from Wired's Julie Moonsey, who said that no amount of patches could make Anthem fun to play. These two mishaps put everyone else in the industry in an uncomfortable spot. While they're getting a game out early or on time, they're releasing products that are disappointing fans and creating distrust between entities, especially in Bethesda's case. After finding that lackluster reviews hurt game sales in the past, Bethesda stopped sending publications early copies of their games. For the past few years, the publisher has sent out review copies on the day of a game's release so that if reception ends up being less than positive, it won't affect early sales of the games. It's not fair to consumers or developers and only serves to meet the financial demands of their publishers. This situation is another bullet point in an encyclopedia's worth of problems in the game industry that revolve around over-demanding publishers. Right now, the options are seemingly either forcing employees to work 80-hour work weeks to finish a game, like Rockstar did with Red Dead Redemption 2, or releasing the game before it's ready, like Anthem in 76. This is partially why fans were so understanding when Nintendo announced that it was completely redoing Metroid Prime 4 in January. Publishers need to learn to give games the time they need to succeed, and if they don't, they can expect them to see a similar reception to Anthem and Fallout going forward. Thanks to writer Mack Stein for that editorial. Let's pass the mic to Logan Berg for this week's game review.
Retro 1980s Taiwanese aesthetic, darkness hiding forbidden secrets, and a troubled family life. Viewers, join us for our review of Devotion. Created by the Taiwanese developer Red Candle Games, Devotion is a first-person psychological horror game focusing on atmosphere with a light amount of item interaction and puzzles. Set in an apartment complex in Taipei City, Taiwan, Devotion takes place over the 1980s, spanning a roughly 3-hour run-through. This wide time span is integral to Devotion in many ways. In terms of the plot, the game proves to be a non-linear inspection of a troubled family. You, the struggling screenwriter, your wife, the starlet-turned-housewife, and your daughter, the aspiring singer. To see this, you walk through time, seeing the evolution and downfall of your family. Almost like a ghostly spectator, you witness the family's key moments, most of which are centered around your daughter Mei Xin, her battle with illness, and the lengths taken to heal her. And with the changes in your family come a change of scenery. The level design of Devotion is simply superb, as you walk through virtually the same apartment time and time again, yet it always feels different. There's the optimism of a new home, but later the doldrum and artificial feeling of a family going through the motions. In a sense, your home is a character itself, acting to reflect or even magnify the emotions of its inhabitants. If you're familiar with the PT demo of the cancelled Silent Hills, this scratches a very similar itch. But I have to mention the particular aesthetic of Devotion. While I'm by no means knowledgeable in 1980s culture in Taiwan, this game just seems to ooze authenticity. There's a myriad of little details, live-action commercials, folk stories, even little snacks, that build upon the culture that I'm sure many of us aren't familiar with. In a genre that always seems saturated with spooky mental asylums and dilapidated houses set in Scary City, USA, Devotion is a massive breath of fresh air. Multiple times I found myself stopping to listen to the music of the game, and I'll admit I've even started listening to Taiwanese pop songs from the 80s. Nostalgia for this period is all the rage, and to see it in the lens of another culture is fascinating. And even more so when it brings in that 80s vibe of commercialism with a strange, esoteric side of Taiwanese folk religion. Again, something I am wholly unfamiliar with. Fear is ultimately born from the unknown. The dark is scary because it obscures. Clowns are creepy because their true emotions are concealed under a fake smile. And Devotion is terrifying because I don't understand the culture it comes from. A zombie is something I can handle, because the tropes are abundantly clear. But a mysterious Taiwanese cult preying on grief, that's something that brings out my fear on a foundational level. And just the same, that unknown factor drives me to push further, to understand and conquer that fear. I'm reminded of fantastic horror games from times past. Games like Fatal Frame or the original Silent Hill entries. These games were unsettling because of how strange and out of your element they made you feel. And I believe Devotion is very much like those experiences because it's what the horror genre should be learning from. The games industry as a whole should always draw from diverse sources for inspiration, but horror especially should look to bring in the uniqueness exemplified by Devotion. That's why Devotion is a solid game. While it's a short adventure that doesn't mechanically push the envelope to the level of game-changing, it is an experience that shows how many opportunities the horror genre has to inspire terror. And for that, I hope we see many more titles from Red Candle Games in the future. Devotion is a solid game, and if you want it, well, you can't have it right now. Because of some controversial art of Xi Jinping, the president of the People's Republic of China, the game was review bombed by angered Chinese nationalists and removed from Steam worldwide on February 25th. While Devotion is slated to return, prospective buyers are left waiting. Now on to Kristen and John Luke to close out the show.
That will do it for today's show. We hope you enjoyed it.
Jean-Luc, you don't have to pretend that nothing happened last week. You can tell me.
What? I swear, the editorial was a piece of cake. Really, don't worry about it.
Okay, well, Bobby does have a little bit of extra time to make it out since spring break has started, and we don't have an episode next week.
Right, but that also means that there's a lot more time to check out our social media accounts. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at PixelPeak, AppTV.
And even though we usually stream episodes every Saturday at 2 p.m. on AppTV and YouTube, we're giving our crew a break for next week.
And they deserve it. Thanks to writer and producer Tanner Mazzell, writer Mack Stein, Nintendo analyst Zack Beasley, and producer Caitlin Halley for making this episode as good as it gets.
Thanks so much for watching, and we hope you enjoyed your stay here on Pixel Peak.